I'm at someone else's house in Hilo. So, but I think there's another light on the other side if you want me to try to add more. At someone else's house in Hilo. So,
okay. Yes, we'll try that. So Robert, we're not live yet, are we?
We are. I just set up the YouTube live stream, but that's okay. I mean,
okay.
Live streams like this, because they're live, right? They tend to have awkward openings like this, and there's not much we can do to control it. So
okay,
it's normal.
Okay. Aloha, Patty. Can Patty hear us?
in the meantime, is that okay, Leon?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay.
So does anyone know about Ron?
I do not. Let me grab my phone.
Oh, there he is. There he is, Leon.
Okay. Hi, Ron. Okay, we're all here.
Hold on just 1 second. Okay. Sorry, we had some trolls who were spamming our chat. Okay. Okay, let's see.
Robert, this is
Yeah.
Patty. Just checking if you could hear me. I found an unmute.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Right, thanks.
Hi, Patty.
Okay.
And you can hear me now too, right?
We can hear you, Ron.
Yes, we can hear you, Ron.
Okay, very good.
Lalani, can you say something just to check the sound?
Aloha, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
For the panelists, do any of you have any questions or concerns before we begin? No?
Could we confirm the order of list of speakers?
Yeah, so I'll give a brief intro and then we'll go right into you, Ron, if that's okay.
Okay.
And then Patty, and then Leon, and then Lalani, and then Alfred. And so the idea is each of you will give a roughly 10 to 15 minute presentation. And then afterwards, we'll have a time to talk story, you can respond to each other, or we can answer some questions from the audience. Is that okay with everyone?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. So the YouTube live stream is going, and the Zoom live stream is also going. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Hello, and welcome to this panel presentation at the United Nations Human Rights Council 49th session in Geneva, Switzerland. This event is titled Self-Determination for Alaska and Hawaii, Re-examining UNGA Resolution 1469. It is under the auspices of Incomendios, an NGO in consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. It is also co-sponsored by the Kiwani Foundation and the Peace for Okinawa Coalition. In 1959, the UN General Assembly adopted Resolution 1469 under the mistaken belief that the people of Alaska and Hawaii had exercised their right to self-determination and consented to be integrated into the United States of America as the 49th and 50th states, respectively. The error aided and abetted the United States in its subjugation and pillaging of the people and lands of Alaska and Hawaii, causing serious injury and trauma to 3 generations of people, depriving them of their right to self-governance and the right to determine access to and use of their lands and resources. This panel asserts it is time for the UN to meet its obligation, to correct its error and ensure just remedy for the 60 years of abuses of the human, civil, political, and developmental rights of the people of Alaska and Hawaii. The object of this side event is to prompt the Human Rights Council to call on the UN General Assembly to conduct a review of the adoption of Resolution 1469. We expect that the review will inevitably reveal 1469 was adopted in error, thus requiring the UN General Assembly to rescind Resolution 1469. When that happens, the Hawaiian Kingdom reemerges as an independent state in continuity, and Alaska is restored to the list of non-self-governing territories for decolonization. My name is Robert Kajiwara, president of the Peace for Okinawa Coalition, a nonprofit organization headquartered in Okinawa City with an extension office in Honolulu, Hawaii, and I will be moderating today's panel discussion. Our first speaker is Ambassador Ronald Barnes of the Native Peoples of Alaska. He was first appointed as the Director of Foreign Relations by the Tununak Elders Council, Chair of Indigenous Peoples and Nations Coalition for Alaska. The entity is designated as the free political institution and is now supported by the vast majority of tribal governments in Alaska. Ambassador Barnes resides in Geneva and is the head of mission for the Alaska decolonization movement. He has worked tirelessly for nearly 30 years in advocacy for the rights of the indigenous peoples of Alaska. Ambassador Barnes, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you for your introduction, and thank you for the organizers of this panel. It's very interesting when we discuss the original recognition of Alaska as having the right to self-determination under international law, that the issue of right to self-determination being recognized in the 20th century, and then, of course, being recognized in the 19th century, that we were separate, distinct, and also not a part of the monarchy of Russia or its empire, through diplomatic communications that granted us a status of independence and equal to the European nations. And this was communicated by the United States of America to the monarchy of Russia after it claimed that the monarchy of Russia had the right to regulate commerce and trade because the vast region of Alaska, whose borders were not defined at the time, belonged to the monarchy of Russia, and they had the right to regulate all trade and commerce with other nations. Of course, one would have to look at history and say, well, what about Valdez and Cordova? Those were Spanish settlements. What about these other nations, such as the United States of America? At the time, they were called the Bostonians, who traded directly with us. And also the United Kingdom, Great Britain, who traded directly with us. So the response of the United States is that you have not acquired Alaska. You were sitting on islands of Sitka and of Kodiak. And when you attempted to go to the island without their consent, they removed you, burnt down your forts in some cases, and sent you back to the islands. In essence, they preserved their sovereignty. Thus, we have the right to trade directly as if we are trading with an independent nation. And they use the Emeritus Vattel and his Treatise Law of Nations to assert our status of independence and that we were not under the control of the monarchy of Russia. Of course, today we are seeing that some of the members of the Duma are claiming that they want Alaska back again. This issue always comes up. But what we have to be focused on is that there's a reason why Alaska was placed on the list of non-self-governing territories in 1946 under General Assembly Resolution 66I. There's a reason why we were recognized as a state of peoples under modern international law, and that the United States accepted, by virtue of placing on the list of non-self-governing territories, a list of obligations that were developed by the General Assembly called the factors and principles. And of course, we know that each factor and principle was violated, including 328, 329, that they were supposed to inform us in our indigenous languages. This is important because during the deliberations of the Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the United States diplomat said, there is no precedence of the word indigenous peoples in any General Assembly resolutions. But I had done the research, so I presented GA Resolution 328, 329 saying, no, you had the obligation to inform us in our indigenous languages so that we, number one, are fully informed of our status. We are be able to know and to speak on the matter of our status, that if we come up for a level of development to the extent that we want to develop a new relationship or to assert and resume and restore our independent status, we have the right to know the consequence of any decision we make of our vote, and we have the right to know all procedures relating to that process. These were the basis of resolutions going back to GA Resolution 637 to 644, which stated that they had to abrogate all discriminating law and policy in the administration of a non-self-governing territory. And expressly in some of these resolutions, it mentioned the indigenous or the indigenous peoples, saying that we are basically the peoples concerned who have the right, based on our free political institutions, as it states under Article 73B, and also that in exercising all of these rights, we have the right to not only be associated with the existing organs of the United Nations, such as UNESCO, who were to train us. All of these factors and principles, as were designated when we were supposed to have exercised these rights, were not given to us. So the process and procedure was also expressed that these must be implemented in order for us to exercise our right to self-determination, as stated in General Assembly Resolution 742, all of which were adopted by the General Assembly prior to the adoption of General Assembly Resolution 1469. Of course, we know operative paragraph 2 states that the peoples of Alaska exercise the right of self-determination, and in violation of General Assembly Resolution 644, as I mentioned, which was elaborated and adopted in 1328 in 1957, the United States allowed its white people, by virtue of Supreme Court decision, Teton v. United States, which said that the land in Alaska was for the settlement of the white race, using the precedent of the 1823 Johnson v. McIntosh case, which stated very clearly that we have to adhere to the ascendancy of the European civilization, which is in fact a doctrine of superiority. And these are all principles, or as some would say, tenets of international law, maxims that the United States of America, that the international community adopted, that we were supposed to follow, to be informed of in order to address our rights. And we never addressed any of this. So this is why when a shadow report was delivered to the Human Rights Committee, also to the Subcommission on the Promotion and Protection of Minorities, which later became the Subcommission on Human Rights under the former Commission on Human Rights, Francoise Hampson, after reading and spending 2 hours with me over lunch, reading the 2006 Human Rights Committee Shadow Report, she came out and made this statement: the status of Alaska and Hawaii are so strong. These are two indigenous cases so strong that they have the right to sit as observer states as they are settling their international legal political status, like Palestine. So of course, there's certain procedures if we would like to go through in order to get there. This means that we still have some ways to go, of course, invalidating or abolishing General Assembly Resolution 1469, which is a topic of this discussion. And also, we have certain procedures in developing ourselves on the ground at home in both Alaska and Hawaii, so that we can essentially sit and exercise diplomatic powers and refute the lies and all of the lies and also all of the issues that they violated, which they, through their very well-oiled propaganda machines, will deny, as they are denying in other cases, situations and circumstances. So we also know that they were after Hawaii, they were after Alaska, they were after Puerto Rico. They didn't get Puerto Rico. This is based on statements of memorandums they issued dating back to the late 1800s. But we have a door that is open, but we need to exercise it expeditiously. We need to inform not only our own peoples, because there are our own peoples who fear this status of independence that we were recognized with, but also we need to teach them that it is to their benefit that we sit and exercise diplomatic powers at the United Nations, so that we can respond directly to the assaults, not only in the United Nations, but equally with other states who claim that we do not have the status and that this is part of history. Of course, when you look at 1959 and you look at how the Jewish state itself was created and how even after 50, 60 years, they were still pursuing the criminals who violated their rights during World War II. We believe that And we know that is no statute of limitations for the crimes against humanity. And of course, Alfred Desai is sitting there. He assisted us greatly, and we deeply appreciate him in the memo that was signed in 2018, declaring that, of course, Alaska is an apartheid state, racist regime. And also, this was written by the first time in history by a United States reporter, journalist from Portland, who stated and reported that Alaska is a racist regime. And this is vitally important because what they have done is acts of aggression, whether it be, and I'd like to elaborate on some of this. One of the issues that we must, and I've been told by others to push, is the issue of puppet governments and supposedly resolving our case. Very simply, here's a simple definition of a puppet government. A government which is endowed with the outward symbols of authority, but in which direction and control are exercised by another power. Of course, when it comes to puppet governments, it's important to know that any decision-making process that is made with a puppet governments, international law recognizes that the occupying or colonial government simply made an agreement with itself and is not legitimate. No matter how correct in form, it could look like a valid treaty, it could look like a valid agreement, it could be an act of Congress, which was adopted unilaterally, or in the case of Alaska, when they did adopt General Assembly Resolution 1469, we can see on the records that the European states were accused of granting Alaska and Hawaii as gifts to the United States of America, since USA was instrumental in defeating the acting Axis powers and freeing them from the chains of Adolf Hitler and his regime. Of course, it was the African states who said this, and they said, don't you dare do this to the African territories because we have too many to decolonize. Our problem at the time is we had no other indigenous states from North America who were able to defend us, to support us, or to bring to the attention of the United Nations actively on the floor when these issues were being deliberated, or to assert that these factors and principles that were laid out by the General Assembly be implemented and that we be protected from abuses. So we continue pursuing these rights, and we believe that we are close, but until we get there, we need to ensure that we remain with our due diligence and also our genuine perseverance and everything that we've been able to show, courage, so that we can obtain what we're seeking, and that is to free ourselves from the racist regime of Alaska. And of course, Hawaii, because of the 1901 DeLima v. Bidwell case, they applied and assert the Johnson v. McIntosh case on Hawaii in their so-called unilateral incorporation in these Supreme Court cases. So Hawaii itself can assert that it is under doctrines of superiority and racism. So I don't know how long I've been talking. I can elaborate some more on what it means for us to be recognized. And the hope is for us to be recognized and to be able to harness the Geneva Conventions and the property rights, the right to property that is enunciated in all of those instruments, the 1949 Geneva Conventions. So we are working diligently to pursue recognition so that we can truly be protected, and also to hold our own with the help of other states, which is what we need because it is a United Nations state system. And so we need to continue to lobby, to request support from our peoples of Alaska and Hawaii, to continue to inform them, and also so that we ourselves will be well supported when we pursue this status and the restoration of our right to self-determination and of our existing governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Barnes. Next, we turn to Madam Patty Hayano to share more about the impact of the United States occupation of Alaska. Madam Hayano is from Bristol Bay, Dillingham, and Aleknagik, Alaska. She participated in the 1992 fish-in when President George H.W. Bush ordered the state of Alaska not to arrest the Native Alaskan nonviolent demonstrators against the illegal state of Alaska and the United States of America. She is currently the Secretary for the Elders Council in Southwest Alaska, supporting efforts to gain recognition for Alaska's international legal and political status. Madam Hayano, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Robert, and to the organizers of this panel. I am a Yupik, a real person on the land. My parents were Mary Larson Backford from Aleknagik and George Berg from Nome. My parents were punished severely in school for speaking their language and chose not to teach my sister and I how to speak, which means it is more difficult for us to connect with and learn from our elders. Removing language is a popular means of social engineering pre- and post-statehood to assimilate us into the Western society. I choose not to be a member of any federally recognized tribe, which is a federal construct to control and limit the tribe's sovereignty. In late 1992, I traveled to Hawaii with a group of Alaskans that attended the 1993 centennial of the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian kingdom. We met many indigenous Hawaiians and discussed common issues on sovereignty and free association. Alaska and Hawaii have long supported each other on our indigenous human right of self-determination. When the Russians came to Alaska to trade with the indigenous peoples, the Russian Yukasis decreed that Russians were to get permission to build trading forts and not create the mere thought or suspicion that they were attempting to deprive the indigenous people of their independence. The Yukasis respected our self-governing status. They set up trading posts and traded with the indigenous people for furs. They learned our language and even translated the scriptures into Yupik. When the United States bought us, things were different. Over the years, they have used many tactics to separate the indigenous people from their land and resources. The people were treated as subhuman. To illustrate this, consider the fact that the indigenous people on the Pribilof Islands were slaves of the U.S. government to kill and process seals until they were freed in 1974. Before the vote of Alaska statehood in 1958, the U.S. government encouraged non-native colonialization through free homestead land that brought farmers in who settled in the Matsu Valley and to this day proudly call themselves pioneers. This was based on the New Deal legislation of President Franklin Roosevelt called the Matanuska Colonization Project. The U.S. government also set up military bases and increased the non-native vote through military personnel. In the referendum, the United States military personnel were paid $5 to vote. In 1971, the U.S. Congress passed the Alaska Native Settlement Act, also known as UNGA. This was done because the U.S. government, during the 104 years between the Treaty of Accession to the Statehood Act, did not explicitly address Aboriginal land claims. They brought delegates from each village to vote on signing away their Aboriginal title. Delegates were taken out, wined and dined, and thus missed important discussions before votes were taken. As stated in the Shadow Report for the Universal Periodic Review of the United States of America Human Rights Record, the Land Rights Report itself revealed that the indigenous people of Alaska did not agree to the UNGA legislation. In reality, our people were never informed of our international status, so it cannot be viewed as legitimate, but a unilateral act of the United States Congress. Special Rapporteur Erica Irene Days confirmed that the Alaska indigenous peoples did not agree to UNGA. In 1991, 20 years after UNGA, the Bristol Bay Native Association held a tribal government conference. There was a panel on UNGA, and one of the speakers was an older gentleman from the Bethel region who participated and was signatory to UNGA. He apologized for his role in passing UNGA. One of our local corporate leaders jumped up and belittled this man and said, "We do not listen to people from other regions. We make our own choices." The tirade was so severe that this older gentleman cried. There is a lot of support for the UN revisiting Resolution 1469, but the voices are squelched by our local leaders who are corporately affiliated and want to see a continuation of the status quo. I'll provide examples showing the difference between the indigenous people's will and the will of the local leaders or corporate elite. About 20 years ago, a community center was being planned. At one of the meetings, a local corporate leader was successful at putting his father's name as the name of the center. No one confronted him, but to this day, we still do not have a community center. No one wants to work on a community center named after a local corporate leader that was highly successful at eroding our human and indigenous rights. Several years ago, UN Special Rapporteur James Anya came to Dillingham, Alaska, and held a hearing. There were indigenous people testifying on their difficulties living during post-statehood. After a local corporate leader testified, the other voices became silent. How does this happen? Perhaps it's the years of the corporate leaders suppressing our voices by being publicly shamed for voicing our concerns. Paragraph 108 of the report says, "The situations in Alaska and Hawaii are each unique and merit particular attention and action on the part of the United States to secure the rights of the indigenous people there. The Special Rapporteur intends to address these situations further in future communications with the United States." In 1992, I participated in setting of the net, or the fish-in, where a group of indigenous people, backed by our elders, set a subsistence net in defiance of state law off the shore of Dillingham, Alaska. The group included elders that have passed on, but they felt that it was time to stand up for our rights. The women especially resolute, which is significant in our matrilineal society. Subsistence to us means our way of life. It encompasses all of our culture and traditions, including how we hunt, fish, and gather, how we process our food, and how the food is distributed among elders, family, and community members. For us, the word subsistence has no connection to the dictionary definition. In the early 1990s, we had two powerful men standing up for our indigenous human rights. Pat and Steve Kohler fought against the state's oppression in several court cases after they were arrested for fish and game regulation violations. In one instance, the judge threw out all of their evidence for their defense. In another case, Steve was held in the Dillingham jail for 40 days without a hearing. Pat and Steve finally realized that they lost every time they opened the door of the courthouse. and their indigenous voices were silenced. More recently, our men continue to provide for their families through subsistence and trapping, but they are being constantly harassed by the Alaska Park rangers. One dedicated trapper is so harassed, it's making it difficult for him to continue to trap to provide for his family. Setting fishing gear to catch lake trout is a traditional staple that helps people through our long winters. The park rangers routinely pull up subsistence fishing gear, hampering the ability of people to provide for their families. In closing, as we stated to the state of Alaska and the United States of America during the 1992 fish-in, you violated your suzerain trust responsibility to govern on behalf of the tribal governments of Alaska. We are asserting our international right of self-determination under Article 73 of the Charter of the United Nations. We continue to assert our international status and resist the state of Alaska. Although the pandemic has slowed down activities, we remain steadfast in our resistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Heian. Next, we turn our attention across the Pacific Ocean to the Hawaiian Islands. And for this, we turn to H.E. Leon Kalahau-Siu, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Hawaiian Kingdom. Minister Siu is a prominent strategist, advocate, and spokesman for Hawaii's independence. He is a familiar participant in Geneva at the Human Rights Council and is working to restore or develop new relations between the Hawaiian Kingdom and other states. He is the chair of the Decolonization Alliance based in New York City, a co-author of the book Modus Vivendi Situation of West Papua, and was nominated for the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize. Minister Siu, thank you for joining us today. The floor is yours. You're on mute.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you, Incomindios, for inviting us all to be on this panel. Always a pleasure to be with Dr. Desaias and with Ambassador Barnes and Laulani Teo and with Patty. I just really appreciate having you on this panel because it just provides a lot of depth and breadth to this discussion. And I just want to greet everybody who's listening in to this conversation, because we believe it's something very important, and we believe that you might want to, that you also could benefit from this discussion that we're having. So mahalo for joining in. Thank you very much. I've been serving as the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Hawaiian Kingdom, and for many people, that's kind of an awkward sounding thing. What is the Hawaiian Kingdom? And just to bring you up to date a little bit, the Hawaiian Kingdom is the pre-existing and still existing government of the Hawaiian Islands and for the nation of the people of Hawaii. We believe that this is so because actually international law supports this belief, as well as really historical facts that the United States never acquired the Hawaiian Islands except through deception and through fraud. So we are actually asserting that the Hawaiian Kingdom still exists, even though the Hawaiian Kingdom had been subsumed in many ways by fraudulent acts by the United States, as well as through more recent fraudulent acts in the 20th century, which included the United Nations. And this is where the crux of our discussion is right now. In 1946, as Ambassador Barnes pointed out, Hawaii and Alaska were placed on the list of non-self-governing territories, that is, places to be decolonized. Of course, this particular intention for decolonization came about after World War II. It started prior to World War II, but after World War II, it was really noticed that more than half of the world was still being ruled by about really a handful of other countries. They were colonizing countries. So the United Nations set out to not only create a platform or a forum for the settlement of disputes to bring peace to the world, but also for the decolonization of places. And Hawaii and Alaska were placed on that list along with by the United States, along with Puerto Rico, Guam, and American Samoa, and who was the U.S. Virgin Islands. But what occurred is that as 1960 approached, when the United Nations was showing signs of becoming more determined on how to set forth procedures to decolonize, as the United States began to become worried because of Alaska and Hawaii being on the list for decolonization. So they cooked up a scheme to remove Hawaii and Alaska from the list by pretending to put Hawaii and Alaska through a procedure of decolonization. So ironically, they used the UN's own mechanism to their own advantage by manipulating it to their own advantage, the United States advantage. And so they conducted plebiscites or referenda in both of our places. And those, of course, were highly manipulated to come out with the result that they intended, which was a vote by the people to become states of the United States. So the 49th and 50th states respectively. Now, this is where the crux of the matter is, where the United Nations, at the time when the United States reported to the United Nations that a so-called referenda had been held in both these places, and that the people had freely given their consent to become part of the United States. This report that was entered by the United States in September of 1959 was then adopted as gospel truth by the General Assembly without really checking to see if procedures were followed properly. Of course, those procedures were not yet articulated because that didn't come until 1960, and then the Decolonization Committee itself was not formed until 1961. So the United States was quickly getting Hawaii and Alaska out of harm's way, so to speak, out of the way of being decolonized by going through a fraudulent decolonization process that they invented. And they reported to the General Assembly that, lo and behold, Hawaii and Alaska had chosen to become part of the United States. The United Nations adopted a resolution, 1469, which said, therefore, that matter of the political status of Alaska and Hawaii is now settled, that the people had voted to become part of the United States, that Alaska and Hawaii are now part of the United States, and that is now the new political status that have been approved with the people's consent. And so this is where we come down to the crux of the matter, or the real problem, and that is, did the people give their consent? Because if the people had not given their consent, then the entire proposition falls apart that Hawaii had become part of the United States. Now, people actually had given, the Hawaiian people had given our consent. Back in 1897, the United States was trying to improperly annex the Hawaiian Islands. A number of the senators of the United States, and the Senate has the job of ratifying any kind of treaty, like an annexation treaty. Well, the Senate balked at this because they said, we really can't annex a foreign country without the consent. And particularly because the Hawaiians had organized for themselves a petition stating, and over about 90% of the people of Hawaii signed a petition stating, we do not want to become annexed to the United States. And in fact, we want to remain as a sovereign country, as we had been recognized as a sovereign country since 1843, 50 years prior. So therefore, the consent that if anyone is looking at the issue of consent, the consent really was given in 1897 by the people. And that consent was that they wanted to keep their kingdom as a sovereign nation. And that the consent also said that the United States had no business trying to annex the Hawaiian Islands. Of course, the United States ignored that. I mean, they took it into consideration and they did not pass the Treaty of Annexation. They did not ratify that treaty. But they turned around and they created a false mechanism called a joint resolution of Congress, in which they pretended to annex the Hawaiian Islands. And they basically used that joint resolution, which passed Congress, and then announced to the world and to the people of Hawaii and to their own citizens in the United States that the Hawaiian Islands had become annexed, even though they used a totally improper and insufficient way of annexing a foreign territory. So when 1946 rolls around and the United States places Hawaii on the list of non-self-governing territories, they actually had no business doing that either, because Hawaii had never been acquired through any lawful means. The only means that they could claim to have acquired Hawaii was right there, the evidence in their own history and in the records of Congress, where Hawaii was never annexed. And there was never any lawful action taken to acquire, for the United States to acquire the Hawaiian Islands. Now, unfortunately, the United States had embarked right after their fake annexation in 1898. They had embarked on a massive re-indoctrination program, a propaganda campaign, in which they changed history and they used our schools. By the way, Hawaii had one of the most advanced education systems in the world at that time. And so they used our schools, particularly our elementary schools, to indoctrinate our children and to Americanize our children. So that continued for 60 years until the statehood vote came about in 1959. And that was a very effective 60 years of re-indoctrination, mainly because they had 3 generations of people in which they could erase any memory of the Hawaiian kingdom or of us having been a sovereign nation. So by the time the 1959 plebiscite came about, Hawaii had become totally fooled or convinced that Hawaiians were indeed Americans, and that we had this affiliation and this association with the United States in which we wanted to now become a full-fledged member. And so that's why that vote succeeded. The problem, of course, is that those that voted in that election had to first declare they were United States citizens. And therefore, nobody who voted in that election was actually a proper person to exercise self-determination. That is, the self was a different self who voted, not the self of the Hawaiian nationals who should have been the ones to vote. Hawaiian nationals, of course, were excluded from voting. Even those who understood what was at stake were refused from excluded from voting because they would not declare they were citizens of the United States. So the referendum that was held here in Hawaii was bogus. It was flawed. It was a fraudulent act. The other part was that, and this is what was brought up by our previous speakers, and that is to be able to give consent, you actually have to understand what you're consenting to. And there was no effort made to allow our people or to educate our people or to reveal to us that there were other considerations that could have been available in this referendum. And that, of course, the one that was left out was independence. So the referendum really had only one question: do you want to become part of the United States? And with the implication that a yes vote would mean yes, Hawaii would become a state of the United States. A no vote would mean Hawaii would remain a territory of the United States. So either way, we would still be under the United States. There was never any mention of independence and no effort to actually provide information regarding that. It was kept a dark secret. In fact, there was a PBS program in which one of our friends, a Hawaiian activist, longtime activist, and former representative from Hawaii to the United Nations, that is, he was a person who used to attend the United Nations sessions in the early days. Anyway, but he was on a panel with the former governor, the first governor of the state of Hawaii, who also happened to be the last governor of the territory of Hawaii. And he was on this panel with our friend Poka Lainui, our Hawaiian independence activist. When Poka Lainui brought up this issue that the Hawaiians never gave their consent, and that there was supposed to be an exercise of self-determination, there should have been information provided and education provided about independence. And he brought this up, and the governor, the former governor, kind of laughed uncomfortably and said, "I never heard of such a thing." He was the governor prior to the statehood, and then he became the first governor of the state of Hawaii. And he, the top official, never even heard that there was supposed to be another part of the question to be presented. And he was totally embarrassed by the fact that he did not know that. The person who was sitting on the panel with him, who also expressed that he did not know that, was the Supreme Court justice, actually not justice, he was a chief justice of the Supreme Court of the Hawaiian Islands, of the state of Hawaii. And he also said, "I do not know that. I didn't know this." So this was news to them, 50 years later, after the deed had been done. So going back to 1469, Resolution 1469, the United Nations made a grave error when they adopted that, because they were careless in how they adopted it. They simply took the United States word at face value that the events or the referendum had occurred and that the people had given their consent. So what we're looking for right now is, as a strategy, as Ron had also had brought up earlier, is that we're looking for the United Nations to bring about a situation in which the United Nations can review and reconsider the action that they took. To review it, to find that it was a flawed decision that was made by the General Assembly of the United Nations in passing Resolution 1469, and then finding out that it was a flawed procedure, then to realize that they made an error, and at that point they are obligated to correct that error. So we are looking for the United Nations to review an action that they took in 1959 that actually caused a grave injustice and actually put the United Nations into the position of being a conspirator and for this United States scheme to steal the Hawaiian Islands by pretending that the Hawaiians had agreed to that, as well as Alaska. So this is what we're working on right now. And I'm pleased to announce that we found many receptive ears to, well, first of all, to the plight of Hawaii and Alaska. Many people very much sympathize with our situation. Many states have expressed their regret that this has happened to us. But now what we're trying to do is provide them something that they can do within the United Nations to undo the wrong that was committed at that time. So we are working on that to get a resolution into the General Assembly of the United Nations to simply review the action that the United Nations took. And then we would assume that if an honest review took place, that they would discover the fraud that had occurred and that they had been misled into making a wrongful decision. So thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate the time and look forward to our future discussion, our further discussions, and to our next speakers. Mahalo.
Thank you, Minister Siu. To share more about the impact of the United States occupation of Hawaii, we now turn to Madam Laulani Tio, a peace builder, activist, and musician from Windward Oahu, one of the Hawaiian Islands. She is the coordinator of Ho'opaepono Peace Project, an affiliate of Seventh Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples. She is trained in La'al Lapa'al, traditional herbal medicine, Ho'oponopono, traditional peace process, and midwifery. She is also an artist, mother, and community health worker. She holds a master's degree in public health, specializing in community health development and addressing health issues related to colonization and activism. Madam Tio, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Mahalo nui. You know, I have to say that at this time of human history, there has possibly never been a more urgent time to address the issues that are contained in this very specific request. You know, it may seem like a very small and technical request to have the United Nations re-examine Resolution 1469 all the way back from 1959, taking into account events that happened all the way from 1893. And, you know, in the case of both Hawaii and Alaska, from further back than that as well. However, if we look at the state of humanity at this moment in time and look at the connecting issues and what is really happening in our world right now, there is an urgency that is beyond merely the injustice to the indigenous peoples ourselves. It's really about the survival of humanity itself, the survival of life on our Mother Earth as we know it. And this is why the United Nations really needs to re-examine its own actions in relation to how we move forward together for peace. As somebody who builds peace, you know, I work with families, I work with communities, with different organizations in difficult situations of building peace, where there's conflict. And one of the things that is most important in understanding what peace is understanding what peace is not. And one very important thing that peace is not is peace is not an absence of conflict based on the ability of one party to squelch the voice of another party. You know, and that is incredibly important, because when you have real peace, you don't have a lack of conflict. You have a functionality of conflict. In our kingdom, prior to the invasion of 1893, which I will not call an overthrow, because it was, simply a belligerent act that has not been corrected. And prior to that belligerent act, we need to remember that not only was Hawaii the most literate country in the world, the most literate country in the world, and probably the primary leader in human rights, in the pioneering of the concept of neutrality itself, but also Hawaii had, amongst its many top positions, it had the most printing presses in the world. And what that meant in reality, and this is important, was that we fought all the time with each other. We constantly had different points of view and expressed those points of view, and didn't agree with one another a lot. Sometimes it was very heated, but that is a sign of peace, because what you have there is you have genuine ability of people to communicate and yet to remain as one. And if we think about what our world needs right now, what humanity needs, and the basics of what the United Nations is obligated to do, we really, really need to look at correcting the places at which it went wrong. And this is very, very important. I will note that UN General Assembly Resolution 1469, it speaks to the spirit of Article 73 of the Charter of the United Nations. And when you talk about the spirit of Article 73, which is all about decolonization, right? You're really talking about people's actual ability to determine for themselves what their destiny will be. I will note that it is very, very important to understand self-determination and self-governance. They cannot exist under colonial rule. And it is still colonial rule when you displace the indigenous peoples and their systems of governance and their systems of lifeways. and replace them with settlers. Whether that is at a price or whether it's deliberately, however it happens, it means that you cannot change the self in self-determination. And that is the essence of the difficulty here. So when you talk about the spirit of Article 73, it really has to do with that essence of that self, and also the essence of determination, of true determination, and not a token amount of, choosing what color your prison will be. It's about making actual free and informed choices on the future, and being able to take care of your people and your lands in ways that you are doing so, not others, not being forced to exploit others, but that you are able to care for your populations, your people. And it's very, very important. If you listen to what is going on right now in the terrible conflict that is happening right now in Ukraine, I'm going to say that it's hard for us in Hawaii, and I'm sure this goes for other peoples in Alaska and elsewhere as well. It's hard for us to hear this, not only because our hearts are so broken for people who are being invaded, but also because all of a sudden we're hearing language spoken in the mainstream news that we have been using for many decades about our own situations. We're hearing these terms like national sovereignty, illegal occupation. We're hearing about the importance of the integrity of these nations, and we're hearing about these things that there was recently a quote, one of many quotes, coming from the top leaders of the United States. This one is from Kamala Harris, who says, so Ukraine is a country in Europe. It exists next to another country called Russia. Russia is a bigger country. Russia is a powerful country. Russia decided to invade a smaller country called Ukraine. So basically, that's wrong. That's a quote from Kamala Harris. And so, of course, for us, we absolutely agree with that those things are wrong. And at the same time, the irony is inescapable, because we have been invaded. We continue to be invaded. Every day we're being invaded. And this is happening in a very real way. And honestly, it hurts that the international community has yet to stand with us in a very real way, to stand with Hawaii, who stand for peace, to stand with Alaska, who stand for peace. One thing that people may want to take note of is that both Hawaii and Alaska are in crucial geographical positions as places of peace. That if we are not able to maintain a neutral space for the good of this world in that place called Alaska, this place called Hawaii, if we're not able to maintain those actual spaces, those geographical locations as neutral, peaceful places, then war that will destroy the world is practically inevitable. And I think that that is something that is very important to take into account. When I speak of the destruction that is happening every day, it really is happening every day. Most recently, one thing that has been in the news is a place called Kapukaki, or otherwise known as Red Hill. Now, this place, in case anyone hasn't been following what is happening in this one place on the island of Oahu, is that this is a place where 250 million gallons, I just want everyone to think of the enormity of that, of fuel, of US military fuel is stored on our island in 20 steel and concrete tanks that are placed in this very sacred place, which is, I should note the particular significance of this location. It is what is traditionally considered the entrance to Po, the entrance to the Great Night or the underworld. You could say the underworld is not a good equivalent in our culture, but it is the place where there is the traditional ulu o levalo, which is an ulu tree, a breadfruit tree that has two branches. One represents life, one represents death. And when one comes upon this great ulu tree, one chooses life or death. And that is the significance. That ulu tree grows at Kapukaki, at this place that the United States military has hollowed out and placed 250 million gallons of fuel that is now leaking into our aquifer. This, this came out of World War II. During the 1941 invasion, the 1941 battle, the bombing of Pu'uloa or Pearl Harbor, people who died were buried there. And it, we should note too, that when we remember that battle, that terrible battle that happened at our very sacred Pu'uloa, Japan did not bomb Pu'uloa because of the oysters. They bombed Pearl Harbor because of the presence of the United States military and its potential aggression on others. And that puts us all at risk today, because if we are bombed, the whole world is bombed. And we are at really big risk of being bombed. And meanwhile, 92,000 people's water, 92,000, that's almost 100,000 people on the island of Oahu were drinking contaminated water because these tanks started leaking and the Navy refused to shut them down. So at least 27,000 gallons leaked in January 2014. And it was found that they have been leaking since then. So, we're talking about very, very serious contamination. Now, the United States is saying that they will shut down Red Hill permanently. However, if you listen to the Pentagon, if you've been listening to the news over Ukraine and the speeches that have been happening, the communications from the Pentagon, their spokespeople have been saying that we may need to reopen that at any time if war necessitates it. So in other words, their closure, their promise to close this place may mean absolutely nothing, as have many treaties, many promises that the United States has made worldwide. So we are calling upon the United States to uphold its promise, but we know very well that it will probably not do so. So in the meantime, we are calling upon the United Nations to uphold its duty to a free and just world, and to uphold the rights of all countries, great and small. If it's not all right for a big country to invade a small country, then you need to free Hawaii and Alaska right now, honestly. Because that is, if that cannot be done, let's think about what that really means. That means that you're saying that invasion is okay if it goes on long enough. You're saying that it's that invasion is okay if you displace enough people with settlers from your country, and by abuse of the indigenous population. You're also saying that peace is wrong. And as a person who builds peace, I really, really urge the United Nations to consider what that means. I mean, really, we have in Hawaii, we have one of the world's longest running nonviolent movements for self-determination and for the continuation of our country. We have been very patient. And the question right now is, are we being punished for that patience? Are we being punished for our nonviolence? Seriously. We believe in peace. Our queen believed in peace. Our queen mandated peace. She asked us all to remain in peace, in steadfast peace, for as long as it took for the United States to do the right thing. But as someone who works with bullies, because that's a lot of what peace work is dealing with folks who will not make peace. And as someone who works with bullies, I'm going to say that sometimes you need to be able to strengthen and stand behind those who are being abused in order to make that bully stop. And in this case, it is the nations of the world, the nations who compromise the United Nations. You are those who stand and watch this happen. And it is you who can recognize justice. You are the ones who can recognize what we are doing and support us. All you need to say is Hawaii and Alaska were wrongfully taken off the list of countries that should have been freed a long time ago, that should never have been colonized in the first place. But since they were, our job is to ensure that they are made available to a process, a fair process of true self-determination that recognizes their national sovereignty, as we recognize the national sovereignty of countries who are strategically aligned with the United States' current pursuits. Honestly, it is also important to recognize those countries that have been held at gunpoint for a very, very long time. I do
We
also
have
I'm sorry.
1 hour and a half. I would like to intervene because if we have an hour and a half only, we only have 8 minutes left.
Oh,
Do you know for sure, Ron?
No, that I only based on what you sent to me. So,
Well,
oh,
sorry. What I meant earlier was that we're aiming for about 90 minutes. We don't actually have a time limit.
okay. All right.
But sorry, what was that, Leon? You're muted. You're muted.
At the same time, we should move on because we really would like to hear from Alfred as well.
Yeah.
Should.
Thank you. Mahalo, to Laulani.
Thank you, Madam Teal. We have now heard from representatives of both Alaska and Hawaii regarding the impact that UNGA Resolution 1469 has had on their respective peoples. To close this panel, we would now turn to Professor Alfred de Zayas of the Geneva School of Diplomacy and International Relations. He is a leading expert in the field of human rights and international law and a high-ranking United Nations official. He was the original UN independent expert for a democratic and equitable international order. He is also a former senior lawyer with the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Secretary of the Human Rights Committee, and the Chief of Petitions. He has authored a number of books in several languages. His latest book is Building a Just World Order, published by Clarity Press. Professor Zayas, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Robert, Ronald, Patty, Leon, Laulani. As I said earlier before we started, I know every time I participate in these webinars, I learn something and I've been taking lots of notes. What is important, of course, is that many more people see this, and I ask you to send me the link. When you have it, I'll upload it on my blog, and I will send it on to a number of friends of mine, including, of course, Francisco Cali Tsai, the Special Rapporteur on Indigenous. I will send it on to my successor, Livingston Sewanyana, the Rapporteur on International Order. I will send it to Elena Dohan and to Niels Meltzer and to a number of rapporteurs and former rapporteurs who will have sympathy with your case. Actually, the world is experiencing in these last few months a very profound malaise, and we are more or less at a crossroads in international law and international relations. Many things are changing and many things will change. And it's not only good against evil, it's not only black and white, but since it is a crisis situation, it is for us to, shall we say, use the opportunities that present themselves. Now, the main problem that the indigenous have always had and still have is information. Very few people know anything about Alaska and Hawaii. And the mainstream narrative is just plain false. I mean, we are swimming in an ocean of fake news, fake history, fake law, and it's not being corrected. Even the narratives in the Human Rights Council and the High Commissioner for Human Rights, they're flawed, they're skewed, they're slanted. And what you read in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, Neue Zürcher Zeitung is very frequently wrong, as it is wrong with regard to the simplifications, the caricatures of the Ukraine crisis. It is wrong with the perception of the history of Alaska and Hawaii. Now, I think that everything that was said, much of what was said by Patty Laulani, etc. I would like to have it in writing. I don't know whether you've published any of this, but it would be very useful to have it so as to be able to quote it. I write regularly in the alternative news service called Counter Punch. And I would very much like to bring this to the attention of the readers in Counter Punch, and there are thousands and thousands of them, because they know nothing about it. We have been experiencing an information war, and I must say, if there is any war that NATO ever won, it was the information war. If there's any war that the United States genuinely won, was the information war, because it is the American or pro-American narrative that controls the perception of what is going on. Of course, we have these apology resolutions of Bill Clinton in 1993 and the apology resolution of Barack Obama of 2009. But as you well know, a tree fell in the forest and nobody even heard it. So that no one is concerned about this distant past. And it was done. It's like the old saying, we stole it fair and square, and we're going to keep it. And this is something that has to be fought. I am absolutely persuaded, and I have shared this memorandum, a call for review of the historical facts surrounding UNGA Resolution 1469. I was honored to be able to participate in this, and this is co-signed by Dr. Keone Dudley, by Leon, by Poka Laiuni, and this I have shared with several ambassadors, friends of mine. I've also shared it with my successor, Livingston Sewanyana, but of course the ground has to be prepared. Obviously, it can be reviewed and reversed. There are precedents, you know, that the General Assembly Resolution 3379, the resolution Zionism is a form of racism, was reversed in 1991 by Resolution 46/86. And also matters of decolonization can be reviewed by the International Court of Justice. That's why actually a move for an advisory opinion on matters of self-determination by the International Court of Justice would be very important. We have the 2019 advisory opinion in the Chagos Islands case, that was Mauritius against the United Kingdom, where the International Court of Justice decided very, very clearly. I mean, I could cite from it. Let me see whether I have it here. Here it is. I mean, the court concludes that the United Kingdom has an obligation to bring to an end its administration of Chagos Archipelago as rapidly as possible, and that all member states must cooperate with the United Nations to complete the decolonization of Mauritius. Well, the decolonization of Alaska never took place. The decolonization of Alaska was the result of a fraud. The decolonization, or rather the absorption, annexion of Alaska into the United States and of Hawaii into the United States was the result of fraud on the United Nations, on the General Assembly, on the world. But that, in order to upset that, you have to have the facts and very clearly stated historically, chronologically, point by point by point, and then show how the settlers and the military were allowed to vote in a self-determination process, which of course every self-determination referendum should only be consulting the natives, not the settlers. I mean, it is absurd what happened, but again, people don't talk about it because there's no way you can justify it. So the best thing is not to talk about it. And if you raise the issue, then people say, oh, no, that's cold coffee. Who cares about that? That happened 60 years ago. Don't bother me with that. Well, yes, we have to bring it up. And I think there is sympathy. There are a number of rapporteurs with whom I have spoken who definitely have sympathy with the case. And I was wondering whether Leon, who has good relations with many countries, with many foreign ministries, etc., whether Leon could approach, for instance, the Bolivians. The Bolivians are really indigenous. Huh? If you ever go to Bolivia and many countries of Latin America, unlike in North America, where the indigenous were largely subjected to genocide, in South America, you still have millions and millions and millions of indigenous. And I would estimate that the population breakdown in Bolivia is probably 80% really indigenous, then a certain percentage of mestizos, and the rest, I mean, of the European settlers. And the same thing goes, you know, for Peru and Ecuador, et cetera, et cetera. I've been frequently in Ecuador, and no matter where you look, you have a Quechua, you have an indigenous face looking at you. So I think that these countries would have sympathy with the fate of Alaskans, with the fate of the Hawaiians. And here again, it might be of interest, and I have relations, or rather, professional contacts with the Chinese mission to the United Nations here in Geneva, and with the Chinese ambassador in Bern. I have brought this matter to their attention. And I think that China, being the butt of criticism by the United States and being, constantly provoked by the United States, could very well consider that it is time to advocate for the right of the occupied Hawaiians to be liberated. And when I say Hawaiians, I also say, Robert, I say the population of the Ryukyu Islands. I also say, all Luchans who are not Japanese should not be under Japanese rule. I mean, Japan is also provoking and taunting China. Well, this is one way of telling Japan, you should not be in Okinawa at all. And the United States should not be in Okinawa at all. I mean, they are threatening us. And let's face it, of course, the invasion of a country like Russia has invaded Ukraine is a grave violation of Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter. It is an aggression. On the other hand, read Article 2, Paragraph 4 again. It prohibits not only the use of force, it prohibits the threat of the use of force. And the United States has been threatening with the use of force, provoking China by sending its ships in the South of China Sea, sending its ships around Taiwan, et cetera, the same as NATO has done from 1989, 1990, 1991. When the Warsaw Pact was disbanded in 1991, the most logical thing in the world would have been to disband NATO. I mean, NATO had no more raison d'etre. There was no enemy. The enemy had given up. The enemy wanted to be friends with the West. And this was the one fabulous moment in the history of mankind when we finally could have had peace, when we finally could have had an agreement to live together under the UN Charter. And NATO should have disbanded and said, okay, fine, either we disband ourselves or we develop into a truly, shall we say, all-encompassing alliance that has no enemies, but that tries to cooperate. Maybe our enemies should be the aliens, from another galaxy if they ever attack planet Earth. But in any event, this great opportunity of engaging in disarmament for development, in having mutual disarmament, which is what Gorbachev wanted, was betrayed by Bill Clinton, was betrayed by the Project for the New American Century, was betrayed by George W. Bush, was betrayed by provocation after provocation, expansion. And what does that mean? Violation of Article 2, Paragraph 4. Threat. You cannot conceive of this hostile expansion of NATO to the very border of Russia, anything else as a provocation, anything else as a threat to the security of Russia. I'm not justifying at all the invasion of Ukraine. I think was a huge mistake. I think it was a crime, but I am not absolving NATO of the responsibility for what has happened. And one, shall we say, footnote to that which Laulani said in quoting Kamala Harris, etc. Well, Kamala Harris and this whole government is, shall we say, not far away from the kind of political manipulations and fraudulent statements that we knew from the 1950s, when Alaska and Hawaii were subjected to pro forma, or shall we say, fraudulent referenda, where the results of the referenda were already seen. I think that Laulani disregarded one particular point, which I think deserves correction. I was the representative of the Secretary General back in 1994 for the elections in the Ukraine. I went there twice. I went there in March for the parliamentary elections and in June for the presidential elections. I crisscrossed the country. And it's no doubt that the Russian Ukrainians feel very Russian. About 30% of the population of the Ukraine is Russian mother tongue, including in Crimea. And when I went to Crimea to present my credentials to the then president of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, the guy tells me, вы знаете, господин Zayas, мы русский. I mean, you do know, Zayas, that we're Russian. And I said, look, basically, I don't care. You could be Kazakhstanis for all I care. I'm here only to observe the elections in Simferopol and in Yalta, et cetera, et cetera. But there is a genuine question of self-determination of the people of Crimea, 70% of which of whom are Russians, and of the self-determination of the people of Donetsk and Lugansk, 80% of whom are Russian and not Ukrainian. Of course, nobody wants to do this by war. But again, let's not forget that Russia has been negotiating on this matter since 1914, Minsk I, and what I'm saying, 2014, the first Minsk treaty, and Minsk II of 2015. And who violated Minsk? Ukraine, systematically. And Zelensky even said that he had no intention to negotiate on Donetsk and Lugansk. So if there's no readiness whatever to abide by a treaty, by the Minsk agreements, that all adds up. And the mainstream narrative in the West just simply undoes it, like it nothing, there was nothing there. It's black and white is the battle between good and evil. But doesn't that remind you of the battle between good and evil in 2003, when the United States, having lied to the world, lied to the United Nations, lied to the Security Council, decided to invade, occupy, devastate Iraq with some 1 million deaths? Well, you know, this actually presents, as I said earlier, an opportunity. And this is a moment in which I think many countries that are feeling this malaise, who are sick and tired of the abuses committed in the name of the United States of America. Now, all I can say, I'm an American, not in my name. I'm very much against what is being done in my name. I want peace in Ukraine. I don't want to send more weapons to Ukraine. I want to have negotiations in Ukraine. And this could have been all simply solved had the two treaties of Putin, which were put on the table in December 2021, had been even discussed. I mean, the arrogance with which Jens Stoltenberg said, Putin doesn't want to have more NATO. Well, I have news for Putin. He's going to have more NATO. I mean, this kind of primitive provocation has led to this tragedy. And there's a lot of people, I tell you, I know plenty of people in the United Nations who think exactly like I do and are very angry at the manipulation of public opinion that has allowed this crisis to degenerate as it has degenerated. So let's make sure that we don't have a black and white approach like Kamala Harris does. Now, back to a strategy. What we need is a strategy to get this resolution 1469 reviewed. The only way you can do it is in the General Assembly, and that means you need votes. You have to do the necessary footwork. You have to convince some countries, like, as I said, Bolivia, possibly Venezuela, possibly Nicaragua, possibly South Africa, possibly Uganda. There's several African states that have been making statements recently that seem to me would indicate that they may embrace your cause, as well as, of course, countries in the Pacific that might be more interested in making sure that there is peace in the region and that the situation of Hawaii is properly solved. So in any event, it is a matter of crucial importance to win the information war. It's a crucial importance to have all of the facts very clearly, point by point by point, put down on paper. Send me whatever you yourselves have published, you, Leon, Ron, Laulani, Robert, Patty, especially Patty. I mean, your story, because you lived through this. I mean, your story is hugely important, but it should be in writing and not just in this internet event. And then send me the link for this internet event so that I can spread it in my network. And one last point, I've sent you now in the meantime, well, in the course of this conference, I sent you two emails, and one of them is forwarding the email from this gentleman in Puerto Rico, Ramon Nenades. Ramon Nenades is a self-determination activist in Puerto Rico. I think that the Puerto Ricans have a hell of a lot in common with the Hawaiians. And I think that the Puerto Ricans obviously have a right to self-determination, but they too, they suffer from the manipulation of public opinion. They suffer from the propaganda that the United States has, and of course, the almost complete control of the media. I mean, there's no one pushing the self-determination agenda for Puerto Rico, and all the corporate media, whether it be CNN or Fox or New York Times or Washington Post, obviously they have no sympathy with the Puerto Ricans. They want to, keep the world the way it is so that the rich remain rich and the poor remain poor. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Zayas, and thank you very much for remembering Luchu or Okinawa. And yes, you are absolutely right. We do need to get more of our
which I mentioned here. Luchu and Okinawa are here.
Yes, that's right. And Professor Zayas's latest book, Building a Just World Order, published by Clarity Press, he does talk about Luchu, Okinawa. He talks about Hawaii, Alaska, Guam, Puerto Rico, and many others who have
paragraph 69, little n of my 2013 report to the General Assembly, which Ronald is using now in a resolution, because indeed, I mean, let's try to get these petitions from the natives of all of these countries under occupation. Let's have these petitions sent to CERD, to the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, have these petitions sent to the Decolonization Committee, the Committee of 24 of the General Assembly, have these petitions also sent to countries that may be able to endorse them. Because when I went personally to the president of the Committee on decolonization, that at the time was the ambassador of Ecuador. They received me very pleasantly. I delivered the documents in original that I had gotten from Leon and from Ronald, but nothing came off of it. And I tried to convince my successor, Livingston Sewanyana, to pick up on it and to follow up on it. I mean, Sewanyana, who is from Uganda, by the way, Uganda has a government that is not, shall we say, in the pocket of the United States or in the pocket of NATO. It has a more, shall we say, enlightened and independent president. That being the case, Uganda might be a country to pursue. And the next time I see Livingston, I will bring this to his heart, and I hope that that might get us somewhere. But going back to the issue of the information war, we have to make everybody know that there has been at least a recognition, even if nobody knows about the two apologies of Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. They exist. Everybody should have the text, even though the last paragraph of both resolutions, of course, is intellectually dishonest. And it says, well, this resolution does not provide any legal basis for claims against the US government, meaning we stole it and we keep it. In any event, there is a recognition of guilt. There is a recognition that injustice was made. That in itself means something. if the general public knows it. And nobody knows it in the United States that this ever happened. So it's up to you to make sure that these facts become known. And again, I am very, very persuaded that this memo can do the trick. The memo has the right length, it's 14 pages. It really argues point by point, gets you there just simply to say, let's talk. Let's bring this to the GA. Thanks.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Alfred. I wanted to respond to a couple of things that you said, which and I appreciate very much. But if you recall, back in 2013, I called you from the General Assembly because they had just voted to reinscribe French Polynesia to the list of non-self-governing territories. And that was a major breakthrough. And the interesting thing was that they did not actually take an actual vote. There was basically a show of I can't remember what the word is, like an ascension, not, anyway, basically they just had a show of hands, how many wanted to do this. Well, if you went through and actually counted, there were about 180 countries that supported the reinscription of French Polynesia. And of course, France and just its cohorts and its allies were the ones that were against it. But this is how I see what I see would happen if we could get a resolution to review 1469, because that would, like the acceptance of the resolution to reinstate French Polynesia, I see that a review of 1469 would have widespread, wholesale support from all of the island, all of the countries, because almost all those countries do understand our situation, and because they have been exposed to it. It's just that they don't have a vehicle that they can use to express their support. Primarily, or part of that has to do with the fact that they have to be aware of the consequences that could occur to them if they were to take a more direct challenge to the United States. So this is why the review is an indirect challenge. It's not really a challenge to the United States. It's a challenge to the United Nations General Assembly for a mistake that they made. And this is something very safe for any country to vote for, and basically to correct a mistake by the General Assembly. So it does not necessarily have to bring in the issues of the wrongs that were committed against Hawaii and Alaska. All it has to do is say, did we follow proper procedures? And if not, then let's correct it, or let's have this review. And it's that review that will expose the fraud that occurred. So we really don't need to lobby that many countries. What we really need is a few countries to support introducing the resolution. And if we can get that, then it's a pretty sure thing. We'll lobby, of course, after that for the resolution. But it would be a resolution that does not directly challenge the United States. It challenges the UN. And it basically puts the UN into a position of having to correct a mistake that it made. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Minister Siu. That's a really important point, because we received this comment a lot from many people around the world who say things like, well, I mean, I support Alaska, Hawaii independence and all that, but they think that it's futile. They think, well, the US isn't going to budge. Right? And so I want to clarify, though, for the viewers that in this case, in terms of calling for a review of UN General Assembly Resolution 1469, we are not actually challenging the United States. We're not asking the US to do anything. We are asking the UN to simply review UNGA Resolution 1469. And if they review it, then they will see that there are major errors with this resolution and how it was passed. And in fact, it never should have been passed in the first place. So I just want to clarify that we are, in this case, asking the UN to simply review its own resolution. And they've done this. They've done this in the past with other UN resolutions. So there is certainly nothing stopping them from doing this again with Resolution 1469. We received some other comments. Well, we received a comment from our friend, Helena Nyberg. She wrote, "Good to see you all, friends. Wishing you health and success with your work. As Laulani says, peace today must be understood as what it really is." Thank you, Helena. It's good to hear from you. We received a comment for Ambassador Barnes. It says, sending Ron Barnes aloha. This is Ke aloha Pisiota.
Pishota, yes.
Pishota. Used to attend IPWG for Ka Lahui, Hawaii.
Mhm.
Thank you for your comment, Ke aloha. We received, let's see, a comment from Yushi Shi, ni hao, hello. We received actually hundreds of comments of support from China on Chinese social media. Just saying things like, well, I'm translating here, but saying things like, we support you, good job, keep up the good work, good luck, and things like that. So thank you very much to all of our viewers in China and all of our viewers around the world for your support.
I wanted to make one more comment, and that is that here in Hawaii, I believe we've turned a corner in that people now in Hawaii are beginning to see the possibility, not just the possibility, but really they're looking at the future of Hawaii and saying, we not only would be better off without being being a puppet of the United States, they would be better off making our own decisions on our own basis. And so when Laulani spoke about Red Hill, and that was something we, the Hawaiians, have been complaining about and warning about for many years. And suddenly a leak occurred. I mean, one of many, but this one was big because it actually affected the military dependents and the personnel on military bases, where they had to shut that all down, and they had to actually evacuate the people because they could not use that water. It was poisoned. And then that's where it started, when the military dependents themselves were directly affected by this contamination. They put up a fuss, but also the state of Hawaii also got on board, and the legislators, a congressional delegation from Hawaii got on board and demanded that the whole operation be ended. And so they came out on our side. This is what we were doing. We've been demanding to end the operation, but nobody spoke up until this leak occurred. And then everybody saw that this was a danger, a existential danger to all life on Hawaii, on the island of Oahu. And so it rallied everybody together. So there's been many cases in just the last few weeks of a turnaround of the attitude of we don't need the military here in Hawaii. They're dangerous to us. Secondly, that we can do things better ourselves rather than listening to what we've been dictated by all of these years. So it's a great feeling that's going on. The Hawaii County Council, which is one of the counties in Hawaii on the Big Island of Hawaii, the council had a resolution that they proposed a couple of weeks ago to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And some of us thought, well, that's good and well, but what about the US invasion of Hawaii? Yeah, and so they are actually considering, they haven't introduced it yet, but we helped them rewrite their Ukraine-Russia resolution, substituted the name USA for Russia and Hawaii for Ukraine. And lo and behold, we have this resolution that is so powerful because it was written so well to begin with. And so we're looking for one of the councilmen to actually introduce this, and with the idea that they need to adopt this, because otherwise they have no moral grounds to condemn Russia if they don't condemn the United States for what it has done. And so there's a huge turnaround, and we're just seeing it. There's evidence of our Mauna Kea ku'e there, where we stopped the building of a 50-meter telescope. Now they decided that they're going to change the administration of the mountain and include Native Hawaiians in that administration. Before, it was just the Board of Regents of the University of Hawaii. Now Native Hawaiians are going to take part in being part of the administration. So we've made huge inroads on the ground by convincing our people in Hawaii, even those that are not Native Hawaiians, who have not been involved in these issues, they're suddenly waking up and seeing that there's a better, peaceful way to accomplish what we need to do for our future.
Thank you, Minister Siu. We are over time. We are approaching the 2-hour mark here. So I think it's best that we wrap up here. But we had a fascinating discussion, and certainly we have a lot more to discuss moving forward. And I hope that we will be doing more of these panel discussions in the near future, because we do have a lot of important things to discuss.
Robert, please do send me the link, because I want to disseminate the link in my network. And if there's a link that I can also upload on my blog, I will do so. I just uploaded on my blog the statement I made last week, pre-recorded statement for the interactive dialogue at the Human Rights Council on the oral update of the High Commissioner on the situation in Venezuela. And so this, I think, would be a good follow-up on that interactive dialogue. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor. Yes, we will certainly send out that link. I wanted to ask Ron or Patty if you have any closing remarks.
Thank you, Robert. I'll just say thank you. Thank you, Leon. Thank you, Laulani. And of course, Alfred and Patty and all of us. I think we will obtain something. That's my belief. So thank you very much. And thank you for to Incomindios and to Helena and to others. And I appreciate the Chinese audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Barnes. Madam Heiano, any closing remarks?
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you to panelists, Leon, of course, Ronnie, Leilani, and Alfred, and to you, Robert, for hosting this event, and to all of the participants that have followed along. And thank you, and that's all I have.
Thank you, Madam Heiano. And thank you, thank you to all of our panelists for taking time out of your very busy schedules. I know you each have a lot going on, but we really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us and to share your knowledge with us. I especially would like to thank Madam Heiano, because I know it is very late for her in Alaska. So thank you so much for being here with us, Madam Heiano. Really quick, Madam Teal, any closing remarks?
I want to say what an honor it is to be on this with all of you, and mahalo for all of those things. You know, prayers for peace for the world. There are so many things that we're all facing together. I have to make one little small comment that regarding Mauna Kea, because that was brought up just really fast, to ask everyone to please keep their eye on that, because because the HB 2024 that was passed with the determination for Hawaiian, just to be very clear, is not doesn't actually give a real Kanaka voice to the protection of the mountain, which is faced with many things, and I can't get into it right now, but do want to ask everyone to please stay vigilant on that. We had a big earthquake at Mauna Kea today, and I just happened to be here, and so I just want to say that the earth is speaking, the Mauna is speaking, and we, the indigenous peoples, are here to speak as well. And I really do hear Dr. Desaias's, what you're saying, that we need to put some of this in writing, that we need to inform better, and we need to make those connections. And so mahalo nui loa to Ron and to Leon and to Patty for all that you have done for so long to make those connections internationally, so that we as humanity can understand this huge change that needs to occur. And mahalo, Robert, for excellent facilitation as always. Thank you all so much. Mahalo.
Thank you, Madam Teal. I would like to thank Incomodios for accrediting this event. Thank you so much for your support over the years. Helena Nyberg wrote, great job. Let me assure you all of the ongoing solidarity and support of Incomodios. Thank you very much, Helena, for all of your support. We really appreciate it. Thank you to the OHCHR for allowing us to speak.
And a belated happy birthday to Helena.
Oh, happy birthday, Helena. Thank you also to co-sponsors, the Kuani Foundation and the Peace for Okinawa Coalition. Thank you to everyone who tuned in for this, the live stream event, and for all of your kind comments of support. We very much appreciate it. And thank you to all of the viewers who will be tuning in to the recorded version of this event in the future. You can check out our websites listed below, written in the link below, peaceforokinawa.org, hawaiiankingdom.net, and you can find our contact information listed below. Thank you again to everyone for tuning in. Thank you to all of our panelists. We will see you next time.
Aloha.